What were God's instructions concerning the vows of a woman still living in her father's house? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Numbers on Walking Through the Bible.
Glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, turn to Numbers chapter 30. We're going to be reading from verses 1 to 8. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Numbers chapter 30, beginning at verse 1. Then Moses spoke to the heads of the tribes concerning the children of Israel, saying, This is the thing which the Lord has commanded. If a man makes a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by some agreement, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. Or if a woman makes a vow to the Lord and binds herself by some agreement while in her father's house in her youth, and her father hears her vow and the agreement by which she has bound herself, and her father holds his peace, then all her vows shall stand, and every agreement with which she has bound herself shall stand. But if her father overrules her on the day that he hears, then none of her vows nor her agreements by which she has bound herself shall stand, and the Lord shall release her, because her father overruled her. If indeed she takes a husband while bound by her vows, or by a rash utterance of her lips by which she bound herself, and her husband hears it and makes no response to her on the day that he hears, then her vow shall stand, and her agreements by which she bound herself shall stand. But if her husband overrules her on the day that he hears it, he shall make void her vow which she took, and what she uttered with her lips, by which she bound herself, and the Lord will release her. In the last two chapters, we've been looking at the daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly sacrifices that were to be offered to God on top of the individual sacrifices that were to be offered. What we found was over the period from Sinai to the death of Jesus, a period of about 1,479 years, a tremendous amount of animals were appointed to be offered, none of which could remit sin. It should impress upon us just how valuable and powerful the sacrifice of Jesus was. One sacrifice able to remit all sins of those who obey God in faith. Moving on to chapter 30, we turn to dealing with vows. We have seen instructions concerning vows in Leviticus and here in Numbers, but these instructions mostly concern the vows of women. Again, some detractors of the Bible might like to use this chapter as a way of showing that women were treated as less than in God's eyes, because they were either under the authority of their father or under the authority of their husband. But God didn't view women as something less than. When living at home, all children are under the authority of their father. Even though it is not mentioned here, it is quite likely that boys living in their father's house were under the same regulations as are laid down for the girls here. However, when it comes to marriage, the husband is to be the head of the household. This doesn't make a woman less than the husband in sense of value, but it does mean that the woman's role is not the head. You can't have two heads on one body, and the body be able to function. Likewise, in a marriage, you cannot have two heads, and the marriage be able to function. God gave the man the role of head, but that doesn't mean that women are less valuable in the eyes of God, for he gave them an important role in rearing children and a vital role indeed. When it comes to vows, the general rule was that if someone vowed a vow, they were to do what they had vowed. Jesus said something similar in Matthew 5:33-37, where he said that our yes was to mean yes and our no was to mean no. We were to do what we said. Note here in Numbers 30, though, that Israel wasn't commanded to vow here, but when they did, God was going to regulate their vows. However, there are going to be three exceptions that we're going to look at. Two exceptions in this lesson and one in the next. All three concerned women. If a woman who was living in her father's house made a vow, the father had the ability to void the terms of the vow. Why? Because he had authority over her as his child, and therefore, as the one in authority, had the right to agree or disagree. If he agreed with the vow, or if he held his peace, then the vow was to be performed, and it could not be changed. If, however, when he heard the vow, he disagreed, he could overrule the vow. This could only be done on the day he heard the vow, not at some later time. Note, though, his silence carried with it agreement. Therefore, a father couldn't use his silence on the matter to later claim that he had the right to have the vow broken. The second case concerned a woman who made a vow and later got betrothed or married. Because she is now going to be under the authority of her husband, he has the right to overrule the vow, even if her father agreed with it. This is true when we think of government today. One government may make a law, and the next government come in and change the law because they disagree with it. Well, a husband has the same option, though the instructions are going to be the same as before. The day he hears of the vow is the day the decision is to be made. If he agrees or keeps silent, the vow stands. If he vocally disagrees, the vow is overruled and the woman is released from her vow. We'll conclude this discussion, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Numbers chapter 30, verses 9 to 16, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.